Is Ukraine about to make concessions? The war is hurtling towards a turning point, the key you cannot avoid. Slogans of absolute victory are crumbling, replaced by the chilling, pragmatic question of survival. For Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, this is no longer a simple contest of battlefield wins or losses. It has become a brutal life-or-death choice. Cling desperately to every inch of land or swallow the bitter pill of concessions to safeguard the very existence of the Ukrainian state. As Ukraine's military resources dwindle and its once-lauded offensive grinds to a halt with no clear breakthroughs, the government in Kyiv is being suffocated by an increasingly harsh reality. The West's resolve is also beginning to fracture. European nations, once roaring with hardline stances and unconditional declarations of support, are now whispering conciliatory tones. Talk of freezing the conflict, establishing demilitarized zones, or pursuing political solutions is growing louder. This dramatic shift in rhetoric isn't just a sign of war fatigue. It's a silent, damning acknowledgement that military force is unlikely to reverse the grim situation on the ground. In this suffocating context, President Zelensky is trapped in an impossible dilemma. On one side, he is bound by the sacred principle of territorial sovereignty, the very foundation of his political legitimacy. The other, he feels the immense, crushing political pressure emanating from Washington. This pressure comes particularly from the U.S. president, who is now spearheading a more pragmatic, negotiation-focused approach. Ukraine's historical turning point is therefore inextricably tied to the choices of President Zelensky himself. Following the strategic juncture facing the Ukrainian leader, the brutal reality on the battlefield increasingly shows that the scales of war are no longer tilting in Kyiv's favor. In recent months, the Russian Federation has unleashed a ferocious new pace to its offensive, systematically expanding its control in key areas like Donetsk and Zaporizhia. Simultaneously, it is applying direct, relentless pressure on Ukraine's strategic defenses in the east. These are not sporadic skirmishes. They are a calculated, systematic campaign designed to obliterate the enemy's long-term defensive capabilities. In the face of these devastating losses, the very language used to describe the conflict's course has been warped. The loss of control over critical areas is now euphemistically described as a tactical retreat to preserve forces. However, this is nothing more than a desperate linguistic maneuver to downplay catastrophic defeats, a tacit admission of a rapidly diminishing ability to hold territory. Strikingly, Western media has become a willing accomplice in softening this grim reality, meticulously avoiding the direct labeling of setbacks on the battlefield. This indirect acknowledgement has crept into the analyses of major European newspapers. The Guardian starkly noted that Ukraine is running out of military options. Even the EU's massive €90 billion aid package is seen as merely enough to maintain a defensive posture, with little hope of engineering a decisive reversal. In this context, with the U.S. president championing a more pragmatic approach to the war, it is brutally clear that the battlefield reality is not in Kyiv's favor. And time is no longer an ally to President Zelensky. Pushed into a corner, the president was forced to make a pivotal political move by announcing a 20-point peace document. On the surface, this document fiercely upholds the core principle of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity as non-negotiable. Yet a deeper examination reveals a desperate attempt to reconcile lofty ideals with the unforgiving realities of the battlefield. 2 points in this document expose the agonizing concessions being made. Point 12, concerning the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, shows the Ukrainian government accepting a U.S.-Ukrainian co-management option for nuclear safety. This signals Zelensky's willingness to lean more heavily on Washington in a desperate exchange for strategic protection. Meanwhile, point 14 on disputed territories is far more explosive. The proposal to freeze the conflict, establish a demilitarized zone, or create a free economic zone ideas, championed by the USS's stark reflection of the reality that Ukraine lacks the military might to reclaim these territories by force in the foreseeable future. The decision to link this option to referendums is a cunning political maneuver. It not only seeks a veneer of legitimacy, but also allows Zelensky to shift the monumental burden of historical responsibility onto the will of the people, thereby legitimizing territorial concessions in the face of an unyielding military stalemate. These concessions did not materialize in a vacuum. They are a direct reflection of a broader seismic shift in the West's perception of the conflict. From a steadfast pursuit of Russia's defeat, many centers of power in Europe are now pivoting to the language of political compromise. Newsweek's open discussion of territorial concessions demonstrates that scenarios once decried as surrender are now being seriously debated in mainstream media. This tonal shift is most glaringly evident in Germany, a key pillar of Europe's security architecture. Within a single week, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius went from issuing dire warnings about a direct conflict between NATO and Russia to vehemently denying the possibility of a Third World War. This rapid reversal is not merely an adjustment of resources. It reflects a dawning, terrifying awareness that escalating the confrontation with Moscow poses risks far greater than any potential rewards. Russia's reaction to this has been equally telling. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, sarcastically questioned whether Europe had woken up or was simply entering its Christmas break. This barbed comment signals that Moscow recognizes the significant shift in its adversary's posture. In short, Europe appears to be slowly abandoning the illusion of a military victory for Ukraine, grimly accepting an outcome built on unavoidable, painful compromises. Amidst this backdrop of a Europe toning down its rhetoric and accepting the battlefield reality, another, even more decisive axis is emerging: the direct, heavy-handed involvement of the U.S. president in reshaping the peace process. At the heart of this storm is Gabbard, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, who publicly demolished the narrative published by Reuters that Russia still harbors ambitions to seize all of Ukraine and threaten Europe. According to Gabbard, these assessments are not only baseless but are deliberately inflated with fear, serving the interests of war hawks who seek to prolong and escalate the conflict. Gabbard's argument strikes at the core of the current debate raging within Washington. Firstly, Russia is not deemed capable of expanding the conflict into a direct confrontation with NATO. Secondly, the prolonged war is not a result of Moscow's initial plan of attrition, but is primarily a consequence of the breakdown of the 2022 Istanbul negotiations and the escalating level of NATO intervention. This view directly contradicts the long-standing narrative that paints Russia as an insatiable expansionist power. It is from this radical revaluation that the U.S. president is pursuing a clearly pragmatic peace strategy. Instead of continuing to place the EU and NATO at the center of the diplomatic effort, the president has chosen the path of direct negotiations with Moscow, viewing it as the fastest route to ending hostilities. This approach not only diminishes the role of European allies, but also directly challenges the immense influence of policymakers who have long advocated for a protracted confrontation with Russia. For Zelensky, this American pivot creates suffocating new political pressure. Washington is no longer offering a blank check of unconditional support and is instead prioritizing a swift deal which dramatically narrows Kyiv's options. In other words, the internal battle against the hawks in the U.S. is not just a struggle within Washington, it is directly dictating the ultimate limits of the Ukrainian leadership's decisions. After effectively sidelining Europe on the Ukrainian issue, the U.S. president sent another, even more shocking strategic signal: the Greenland issue. Washington's appointment of a special envoy for Greenland and its proactive approach of directly engaging with the island's inhabitants, bypassing the Danish government, showcases a radically different American approach. This is not a typical diplomatic story. It is a brazen reshaping of the power dynamics in the Arctic. Notably, the European Union's reaction has been extraordinarily muted, lacking any strong condemnations, warnings, or countermeasures. This deafening silence reveals Europe's strategic paralysis. Even when the security and sovereign interests of a member state like Denmark are being directly challenged. When compared to the West's typically hysterical reactions to similar actions by Russia, the difference is staggering. Behind the Greenland saga looms a crucial, unspoken factor: Russia. The Arctic is a region where Moscow holds vital interests and possesses a superior fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers, a capability the U.S. cannot yet match. This reality means that every move Washington makes in the region is inseparable from Russia's calculations, requiring at least a level of coordination to avoid unintended, catastrophic conflict. From Ukraine to Greenland, Washington's strategic realignments have presented Zelensky with a historic, agonizing choice. The Ukrainian president is now facing not only crushing military pressure from Russia, but must also adapt to a new political reality where Western support is no longer absolute. Holding on to land could mean a protracted, unwinnable war and the total exhaustion of his nation. Conversely, embracing the U.S. president's approach means accepting painful, humiliating concessions to preserve the state. The final haunting question is this: how will history remember Volodymyr Zelensky?